Tonight on ABC News Live Prime, Nicolas Maduro tells a Manhattan courtroom that he's still the president of Venezuela. His wife and accused co-conspirator was also in court, the two entering pleas of not guilty. The world is watching the dramatic events unfold. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, brought into court together under heavy guard. Maduro identifying himself to the judge, saying, "I am the president of Venezuela. I was captured at my home in Caracas." His wife referring to herself as First Lady of the Republic of Venezuela. The defense revealing Celia Flores was injured during the U.S. raid on their compound. Maduro calling himself a prisoner of war as he left court. What we're now learning about their possible defense.
I'm Aaron Katursky at Manhattan Federal Court. We'll have more on what was said inside that courtroom.
Also tonight, new images show the daring U.S. military raid to capture and extract Maduro and his wife. American chopper pilots wounded and 32 Cubans killed trying to protect Maduro. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth suggests Maduro and his wife didn't know what was happening until 3 minutes before they were captured. And America's top general today briefing lawmakers about the operation. President Trump doubling down on his claim to run Venezuela, declaring we're in charge, and his new threat of possible military action targeting other nations as Venezuela swears in a new government. Maduro's son addresses the country's General Assembly, blasting President Trump for capturing his father, warning no country is safe. Tonight, Venezuelans are cautiously hopeful about the future of their country. And the major change to the child vaccine schedule as flu cases skyrocket in almost every state. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. makes an unprecedented change in the number of child vaccine recommendations from 17 to 11, effective immediately.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is Prime with Linsey Davis.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Linsey Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We begin with ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, arraigned today in federal court. They were captured in a meticulously planned operation in the middle of the night and hauled to America in handcuffs as explosions struck across Caracas. Maduro pleading not guilty of conspiring with vicious drug cartels. The defiant president declaring in court, "I will be free." We'll have in-depth analysis in a moment, but first, here's Aaron Katursky, who was inside the courtroom.
A little more than 48 hours ago, Nicolas Maduro ruled a nation with 30 million people and the world's largest oil reserves. Tonight, the deposed Venezuelan dictator is a shackled criminal defendant, whisked from jail in Brooklyn, flown across the East River by helicopter into Lower Manhattan with his wife and co-defendant Celia Flores to face federal drug charges. Escorted under heavy guard to an armored vehicle for the short ride to federal court, where canine dogs roamed the hall and U.S. Marshals inspected the courtroom chair where Maduro would sit. Nicolas Maduro's presence inside Manhattan federal court brought protesters here outside, some denouncing the U.S. military action that captured him, others supporting what President Trump ordered. Inside, Maduro greeted spectators in the courtroom, saying "Buenos dias." He put on headphones for Spanish translation and rose in his seat as the judge asked, "Are you Nicolas Maduro?" "I am the president of the Republic of Venezuela," a defiant Maduro responded. "I am here kidnapped. I was captured at my home in Caracas, Venezuela." The judge cut him off. Maduro's wife declared, "I am the First Lady of the Republic of Venezuela," before the judge interrupted her. "The purpose today is just to ask who you are." Prosecutors say Maduro and his wife worked together to traffic cocaine.
What the government is alleging is they literally were handing out passports to drug dealers. They were engaging in murder and kidnapping, using the diplomacy, using the veil of the Venezuelan government to pursue this drug conspiracy.
Asked how he pleaded to the charges, Maduro said, "I am innocent. I am not guilty. I am a decent man. I am still president of my country." Flores then stated her plea, not guilty, completely innocent. Maduro's wife appeared with a bruised and bandaged head. Her lawyer said she may have a fracture or severe bruising on her ribs. Maduro's attorney called the U.S. raid a military abduction and said Maduro is the head of a sovereign state, immune from prosecution. As Maduro was led from the courtroom, someone in the gallery stood and shouted in Spanish, "You will pay in the name of Venezuela." Maduro stopped and turned to face the heckler, saying, "I am the elected president. I am a prisoner of war. I will be free."
Maduro remaining defiant. Let's get right to Aaron outside the courthouse. Aaron, what comes next for him and his wife?
We may not see Nicolas Maduro or his wife Celia Flores here at court again until March. That's his next scheduled court date. And in the meantime, Lindsay, it could be months, if not years, before he ever stands trial. His lawyer today called the case against him complicated, made even more so because Maduro may challenge the way he was captured. Remember, his attorney called Maduro the head of a sovereign state, something the United States does not recognize, and insisting he's entitled to immunity. There's a long road ahead for Maduro, who's back in jail tonight, Lindsay.
Indeed. All right. Aaron Katersky for us. Thanks so much, Aaron. And we are joined now by ABC News legal contributor James Sample. James, thanks so much, as always, for coming on the show. So Maduro's attorney basically said there were legal issues. There are issues of legality, is what he said in quotes, with regard to how Maduro was actually taken. And globally, we've heard that as well. Many saying that international laws were broken here. What would you say on the U.S.'s side about how they were able to do this all legally?
Well, I think as a matter of international law, first, let's be clear. This is the operation was a clear violation of the UN Charter, and the United States is a party to the UN Charter. In fact, the United States was instrumental in putting it together and signed it as a treaty. That makes it the supreme law of the land under Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, the so-called Supremacy Clause. So violations of international law by the United States are violations of U.S. domestic law. In addition, there is the issue of whether Congress needed to be consulted for this kind of an action, even if the action were legal as a matter of international law. That's a matter of some debate. There is a precedent going back decades that spans across Republican and Democratic administrations that this kind of an action has been taken without congressional approval. However, anything subsequent to this, Lindsay, will certainly require congressional appropriations, for example, and Congress will have the chance to weigh in on whether or not it wants to fund the quote-unquote running of another country.
And Maduro's attorney has hinted that he may suggest also that he cannot be prosecuted as a head of state. Any truth to that? There's
certainly a strong argument. There's what's called head of state immunity. And one of the ironies here is that the president of the United States just 18 months ago was held by the U.S. Supreme Court to not be subject to violations of law in U.S. courts. But the United States courts will hold a foreign president subject to U.S. law for violations of U.S. law in U.S. courts. That's an interesting wrinkle here. Head of state immunity, though, only applies if the individual is a credible, legitimate head of state, and the United States will argue that Mr. Maduro was an illegitimate president, and therefore that the head of state immunity does not apply.
Now, did Congress need to authorize this action ahead of time? We're hearing from some Republicans who are saying, oh, well, if Congress had known, we would have never been able to keep this secret.
I think Congress did need to know, but that is a question, to be clear, on which reasonable people can and do obviously disagree. The interesting wrinkle here is that just a couple weeks ago, Secretaries Rubio and Hegseth testified in a private hearing before joint session of bipartisan committee, and indicated that regime change was not at all a part of what they were seeking to do in Venezuela, that it was strictly about drug trafficking. On the other hand, if this was strictly about drug trafficking, the United States has a bit of a double standard to consider when you consider that the president just recently pardoned former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was facing almost identical charges.
And let me just ask, was this constitutional?
No, but it may not matter.
James Sample, we thank you so much for your time and insight, as always. Dramatic new images emerging tonight from the operation to capture Nicolas Maduro and his wife as we learn new details about the American chopper pilots who were wounded and the dozens of Cubans that were killed trying to protect Maduro. Here's our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Ranitz, with the latest.
Tonight, dramatic new video of that dangerous mission to seize Maduro that injured U.S. helicopter pilots. Explosions lighting up the hillside around Maduro's heavily fortified compound in Caracas as U.S. warplanes blasted Venezuelan air defenses early Saturday morning. U.S. forces knocking out power to parts of the city, allowing them to move in total darkness. A dozen U.S. Special Operations helicopters flying just 100 feet above the ground, moving in over the compound, firing miniguns and rockets at multiple targets. You can see in the video what appears to be small arms return fire or an RPG streaking wildly through the sky. A U.S. helicopter was struck during the operation. President Trump saying pilots were injured and bleeding, but continued the mission. Inside the compound, the Army's elite Delta Force team moving in. They had built an exact replica of Maduro's compound and practiced the raid for months. A covert CIA team tracking Maduro's every move right down to what he ate. Secretary Pete Hegseth today saying Maduro and his wife unaware of what was happening until minutes before.
Nicolas Maduro got to meet some great Americans for a night vision goggles 3 nights ago. He didn't know they were coming until 3 minutes before they arrived. In fact, his wife said, I think I hear aircraft outside.
Those special operations forces coming under heavy gunfire by Maduro's security, grabbing Maduro and his wife as they headed for a safe room moments before they could close a steel door behind them.
The safe place is all steel, and he wasn't able to make it to the door because our guys were so fast.
Cuba saying 32 Cubans were killed before U.S. forces rushed Maduro and his wife into the helicopters, flying them out to a ship at sea. Some 200 U.S. forces took part in the operation. The extraction team on the ground only a short time, with no U.S. lives lost. And Lindsay, we have learned several of the U.S. wounded were taken to Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas. None of their injuries life-threatening, but the dramatic images we saw and the return fire aiming at the U.S. helicopters are a reminder of just how risky this operation was. Lindsay?
Martha, thank you. President Trump has declared America is, quote, in charge of Venezuela. Tonight, Secretaries Hegseth and Rubio are briefing lawmakers about the U.S. military operation. And now President Trump is making new threats of more possible military action. Our senior political correspondent Rachel Scott reports from the White House.
Tonight, the nation's top military official who oversaw that extraordinary operation in Venezuela.
Sir, is the U.S. now occupying Venezuela?
Arriving on Capitol Hill to brief lawmakers alongside Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and other top administration officials.
Are U.S. troops being deployed to Venezuela, yes or no?
President Trump is adamant the U.S. is in charge of the country, even as Venezuela swore in Nicolas Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, as interim leader.
We're dealing with the people. We're dealing with the people that just got sworn in. And don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Have you spoken with her?
We're in charge.
But hours earlier, his own Secretary of State attempted to dial back the role the U.S. will play in Venezuela, saying the administration is trying to influence policy with a blockade on oil leaving the country. With world leaders condemning the U.S., the president signaling he could pursue military action beyond Venezuela, with 15,000 U.S. service members now in the region.
Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
What does that mean? He's not going to be doing it very long.
He's not doing it very long. He has cocaine mills and cocaine factories. He's not going to be doing it very long.
So there will be an operation by the U.S.
It sounds good to me.
Colombia's president saying, "Do not threaten me. I'll be waiting here if you want," indicating he's ready to take up arms. In addition to Colombia, President Trump says he could target Cuba and Mexico and make Greenland part of the United States. The Danish prime minister says with respect to Greenland, if the U.S. attacks a NATO ally, then everything stops. Tonight, the State Department posting this image of President Trump with the words, "This is our hemisphere."
Rachel Scott joins us now from the White House. So, Rachel, what more can you tell us about the briefing on Capitol Hill?
Well, Lindsay, this is the very first time that top lawmakers are getting a classified briefing about the events that unfolded in Venezuela, about that military operation. Many Democrats heading in tonight were demanding to know why they were not informed ahead of time. We were told they were only informed after that operation already began. But the president tonight is insisting that that military operation was legal and that the U.S. is not at war with Venezuela, Lindsay.
Our senior political correspondent Rachel Scott from the White House. Thanks so much, Rachel. We turn now to the situation inside Venezuela, where Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in today as the interim president. Meanwhile, Maduro's son addressed the country's General Assembly and criticized President Trump, promising his father he would see him soon. Our chief international correspondent James Longman reports now from the Colombia-Venezuela border.
As Nicolas Maduro insisted to a U.S. courtroom he is still Venezuela's president, tonight his son with the same defiant message from Caracas.
Si normalizamos el secuestro de un jefe de Estado,
if we normalize the kidnapping of a head of state, he said, no country is safe, vowing Maduro and his wife will return to the country. He spoke in front of the National Assembly for this show of continuity and was surrounded by those powerful lieutenants of Maduro's autocracy. Some of them, including his son, are facing the same U.S. narco-terrorism charges as Maduro. The White House says these same people will now work with America to govern the country, but how is still very unclear.
Days after Maduro's capture, there is still no clarity about what is going to happen in Venezuela, and that is why Colombia is beefing up security here at the border. They are concerned about a security breakdown in Venezuela, which could trigger a massive migration crisis.
This border where thousands of Venezuelans cross every day for cheaper goods. Gabriela is hopeful her young son, Josue, can look forward to a different Venezuela.
Do you think things are really going to change? Maduro is just one man.
Hope is the last thing that you lose, she says. Angel is emotional, talking about the state of his country. It hurts my soul, he says. I haven't seen my children in years, and I don't know if I ever will.
So many emotions. James joins us now from Colombia near the Venezuela border. So, James, the Venezuelan government had a stark warning for its citizens today. Tell us what they said.
Yeah, that's right. There was a state of emergency in Venezuela instituted on Saturday in a decree for anybody who knows anything about that U.S. raid to come forward. Well, now they've published that decree in full, warning citizens, ordering the police to track down anyone they believe conspired with the United States to help carry out that raid. Remember, the Trump administration now wants to work with the remaining government in Venezuela, but looking at this, it hasn't really changed that much at all. Lindsay.
James Longman in Colombia for us. James, thank you. We're joined now by Kansas Republican Senator Roger Marshall. Senator, thank you so much for your time. You've supported the operation in Venezuela and say the world is a safer place today. How so, especially given that the Interior Minister, described by the Miami Herald as one of the most feared figures of Venezuela's ruling elite and a central pillar of the country's security and intelligence apparatus, is still there in Venezuela, despite being named on the indictment?
Yeah, Lindsay. Well, Happy New Year to you and all your viewers. Look, we have thrown the head of the snake into jail. Every day, we lose hundreds of Americans to drug poisoning of one sort or another. And Maduro was one of the heads, one of the kingpins of one of those most powerful drug cartels. So we feel like we've cut the head of the snake off. Yes, there's lots of more work to be done here. And that's why the Trump administration has secured the border. That's why we're taking out these drug boats. So there's more work to be done, no doubt about it.
How do you square, though, when we're talking about this being about drugs, the pardon of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was convicted in the U.S. of helping to smuggle more than 400 tons of cocaine to America, with the arrest of Maduro?
Look, I think that sometimes we talk about apples and oranges. We have a person there who's paid his price and evidently is reformed. I don't know all the details of that particular person, but here we have a very active person, a warlord, a drug lord here, who's leading one of the biggest drug cartels in the world right now. And he's working hand in glove with China, with Iran, with all these foreign terrorist organizations as well. So yes, there's more work to be done, no doubt about that. But today, Americans are safer than they were as of Friday.
What do you say, though, to people who say, look, this is not about drugs, this is about oil?
Look, America is very fortunate that we're now the world's largest supplier of oil, that we're a net exporter of oil as well. And life does not happen in a vacuum. I do think it's a piece of the puzzle. This was about making Americans safer. And at the same time, this is the largest oil reserve in the world. So it's going to have a factor. I think the good news here is this can help rebuild the Venezuelan economy. Once upon a time, this was the most successful economy in South America. And I think it can be one day as well. So yes, it's a factor, but most importantly, this was a police operation to arrest an evil, illegitimate dictator who was a drug lord.
The U.S. went into Venezuela and removed the president, although much of the international community since 2019, including at least 50 countries, have not recognized Maduro as Venezuela's head of state. But he was in charge of that country's military and government. Would you say that America is now at war with Venezuela?
No, absolutely not. This was absolutely a police operation. This was a law enforcement operation led by the DEA. We've taken this person out. We've nabbed him. He's now standing trial as well. We are not at war with Venezuela. Just the opposite. We want to empower them. We want them to get to a free and fair election as soon as possible. We want to empower their economy. We want, number one, we want Americans to be safe, but we also want our good friends in South America to be safe as well. And we certainly don't want them controlled by China.
For a president who campaigned on America First, who said that he wasn't going to start any new wars, and now is suggesting that he is going to run Venezuela, he's potentially going to do the same in Colombia, in Cuba, does that give you any pause?
So President Trump's main campaign promise was to secure the border and make our families safe again. And this is the next step. He's secured the border. Now he's making Americans safe again, that this president is focused on the safety, security, as well as the prosperity of Americans. So I think this is fulfilling his campaign promises by continuing to fight the number one threat, the number one foreign threat to Americans are these drugs. I'll go back to what I said earlier. We're losing hundreds of Americans every day to drug poisoning.
Senator Roger Marshall, we thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. And now let's bring in Congressman Ted Lieu, representing California's 36th district and also a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much for your time, Congressman. First off, just want to get your reaction to what we just heard. Is this action by the president justified?
Let me just first say that this month, millions of Americans can no longer afford health insurance. Food prices continue to increase. The electricity costs are skyrocketing. And Donald Trump, in his own words, is, quote, running Venezuela. That is not what the American people want the president to be doing. And this operation was flat out illegal. It was a use of military force against a sovereign nation. Congress never authorized that use of force.
There are conflicting messages from the administration. As you see it, was this action about removing an illegitimate leader to stop the flow of deadly narcotics into the U.S. or to enrich American oil companies, as the acting Venezuelan president says?
Donald Trump, in his own words, said he talked to oil companies before this strike. And we know that the Trump administration is working with oil companies to extract this oil. So if you want to have a debate about whether we should use American military force to get oil, that's a debate we should be having. But that never happened because this operation was not done with the consultation of Congress or approval. It's illegal. And if we want to go use the U.S. military and risk troops' lives to get oil, that's a debate we should be having. And this president sidestepped that debate with the American people and simply did this illegal operation.
What price, if any, do you think the American people will pay as a result of this military action?
Well, what we know is that countries around the world are now going to be less cooperative with the United States of America. And you can bet that a lot of these countries in South America are now going to be much more on alert to any possible additional use of force by U.S. military. And keep in mind, military troops got wounded in this operation. Thank goodness none of our amazing military members died. But this was a risky operation. And the Venezuelans report that 40 people in Venezuela died. So if we're going to use American military force and kill people in a sovereign nation, we need to have Congress approve that operation. That never happened. And that's not what the American people want. They want Donald Trump to focus on our economy, not on running another country.
Do you foresee a full-on ground incursion by American troops in Venezuela?
I have no idea because the president of the United States has not articulated what the end state is that he wants from this operation. Our military is amazing, and we've seen historically our military goes in and accomplishes its mission, but it's always the day after that America has trouble with what are we going to do with this entire country of Venezuela? And how are we going to actually run it? That's actually ridiculous. And so the president should be focused again on the American economy, not on helping oil companies.
We've heard promises about oil wealth before. Back in 2003, then Vice President Cheney promised oil resources in Iraq would generate billions of dollars a year in cash flow. Will this be any different?
Based on analysis, it takes many, many years to build an infrastructure to get this oil. It's not clear that it's actually going to be a profitable enterprise for a number of these oil companies. We'll see if they're actually going to do this. And then how are you going to protect these American oil companies? Are we going to have U.S. troops down there protecting these folks? And then we're essentially creating jobs in Venezuela. We should be creating jobs in America. We should be focused on the American economy. The president's priorities are completely reversed.
Congressman Ted Lieu, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now to the race to reach American tourists stranded in the Caribbean after the military operation in Venezuela shut down airspace and left thousands of flights canceled. Major airlines are now adding thousands of additional seats to try to get them home. Here's ABC's Gio Benitez.
Tonight, airlines trying to get back on track, adding flights to the Caribbean after hundreds were canceled due to the U.S. attack on Venezuela. Thousands of passengers across the region left stranded.
We're like, what? How are we going to get home?
This Denver couple says they've spent thousands on extra hotel costs after their flight from St. Martin was canceled Saturday afternoon.
We don't have money left to continue staying in the island, let alone look for another hotel.
They say they won't be able to get home until this Wednesday. The FAA banned U.S. airlines from flying over Venezuela and parts of the Caribbean on Saturday, citing ongoing military activity. This Flight Radar 24 animation showing flights avoiding the Venezuelan airspace. To make up for hundreds of cancellations and delays, American Airlines adding 43 flights, amounting to 7,000 extra seats, and shuttling people between islands for the first time in over a decade. Delta adding 2,600 seats. Southwest, United, and JetBlue also adding flights. And Linsey, the airlines say they are still recovering, and it's going to take a few days to get everything back to normal. Linsey?
Gio, thank you. We move now to the major health story here in the U.S. The CDC is warning about record-breaking flu cases across the country. 45 states are reporting very high or high levels of flu activity, with more than 11 million cases so far. This comes as major changes to the childhood vaccine schedule were announced today. Here's Rhiannon Alley.
Tonight, an unprecedented change in vaccine recommendations from Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Federal Health Agency. The CDC announcing it's further reducing the number of vaccines it previously recommended for children, effective immediately from 17 to 11. That means the CDC will no longer recommend that every child gets shots for rotavirus, hepatitis A and B, meningitis, RSV, and the flu. The CDC now advising the rotavirus and flu vaccines should only be given to a child if a doctor recommends it. The changes were made without an independent review. Secretary Kennedy, who has long sought to reduce the number of vaccines children get, writing, "This decision protects children, respects families, and rebuilds trust in public health."
This news is a fundamental shift in how the U.S. approaches childhood immunizations. It's really driven by ideology and not about science or data.
The major change comes amid a massive surge in the flu. 45 states now reporting high or very high activity, up from 30 a week ago. Linsey, medical experts stress the best advice is to talk to your child's doctor, and parents still have the ultimate choice about which vaccines to give their kids. Linsey?
Rhiannon, thank you. The Secret Service says a man has been taken into custody for allegedly breaking the windows of Vice President J.D. Vance's home in Ohio. 26-year-old William Defoe was arrested early this morning. Authorities say he used a hammer to try and get inside. He was charged with vandalism and criminal trespass. Vance and his family were not home at the time. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has ended his bid for re-election. The former vice presidential candidate said he's dropping from the race to focus on defending Minnesota from allegations of fraud linked to Medicaid and child care funds. Walz insists that his administration is taking fast action to solve the crisis, adding, quote, "The buck stops with me." Coming up, Venezuela sits atop the world's largest proven oil reserves, but getting to it has always been a difficult and expensive mission. We'll explain by the numbers. Also, our Matt Rivers takes a deep dive on Venezuela's populist and often authoritarian leaders and how they've managed or often mismanaged their oil. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's been nearly 50 years since Venezuela nationalized their oil assets, causing foreign companies there to sacrifice their investments. And they've been trying to claw back billions of dollars in losses ever since. Here's Matt Rivers.
Nicolas Maduro is out of Venezuela. And now President Trump wants U.S. oil companies to move in. The first thought when you think Venezuela might not be oil, and yet it has the largest proven oil reserves of any country in the world. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Iraq, way more than the U.S. U.S. oil companies tapped those reserves for decades. ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, the biggest names in oil raked in billions, pumping heavy crude oil from vast oil fields, most of it bound for the United States. But all that started to change in the 1970s, when Venezuela first started the process of nationalizing its oil, meaning the government took over privately owned oil companies, resources, and infrastructure. For a while, that was okay for U.S. companies. The government allowed most to keep doing business, bringing continued investment and technological advances. Then, enter this man. Hugo Chavez swept to power in the 1990s, partly on a platform that it was time to stop foreign exploitation of Venezuela's natural resources. Oil, chief among them. One by one, he started kicking out U.S. oil companies. Leases to land they had, equipment they had invested in, infrastructure they built, it didn't matter. The government was taking over, and that was that. He used the vast profits from oil to fund his social programs, and for a while, it fueled a resurgent Venezuelan economy. But a toxic mixture of corruption, mismanagement, and a lack of investment led to a swift downfall. At the time Chavez came to power, Venezuela was exporting more than 3 million barrels of oil per day. That number is now regularly less than a third of that. And without oil money flowing into the economy, things quickly took a turn for the worse. Nicolás Maduro, assuming power after Chávez's death in 2013, oversaw such economic and political turmoil in the 2010s that nearly 8 million Venezuelans fled the country, seeking refuge and a functioning economy somewhere else. And as he became increasingly combative with the U.S., Donald Trump decided to target oil during his first term. For the first time, the U.S. would ban Venezuelan oil imports, a crushing blow for an industry already reeling. The Biden administration eased those sanctions, hoping that Maduro would allow free and fair elections in 2024. But that was not the case. Maduro announced a victory that many countries around the world declared fraudulent. And then came the second Trump administration. And the brazen attack in Venezuela's capital city. Getting Maduro out is not enough, says Trump. Getting American oil companies back in is now the goal. This week is a turning point in America's long history in Venezuela's oil industry.
A turning point for sure. Thanks to Matt Rivers. Coming up, President Trump wants U.S. companies to have access to Venezuela's oil. We'll tell you why it's going to be a while before that happens, if it happens. Plus, the NFL playoffs are set. Stephen A. Smith himself joins us to tell us who he thinks is going all the way, and probably not the teams you expect. Welcome back to Prime. Here's a look at the stories making headlines right now. Ousted Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia Flores were arraigned in a New York federal court today. Both entered pleas of not guilty to all charges. Maduro insists he is still the president of Venezuela. And we're learning new details about the U.S. raid. President Trump said several American helicopter pilots were wounded and bleeding, but kept flying. Some 200 U.S. forces took part in the operation. The extraction team was on the ground only a short time with no U.S. lives lost. President Trump doubled down on his claim to run Venezuela, declaring we're in charge on Monday. The president has now issued new threats to multiple countries, including Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, and Greenland. And the CDC changed the U.S. childhood vaccine schedule today to remove the universal recommendation for multiple shots. Officials at the Department of Health and Human Services say it's an attempt to mirror the schedules of other countries. They noted the change was necessary to restore trust in public health recommendations. And still ahead, the first ever weight loss pill is now available. Find out where and how you can get it. Plus, what the U.S. attack in Venezuela means for oil and gas prices. We go by the numbers next. Welcome back, everyone. President Trump has vowed to tap into Venezuela's oil reserves, but experts warn there are huge challenges involved in the president's plan. We're taking a look tonight by the numbers. With an estimated 303 billion barrels, Venezuela is home to the world's largest proven oil reserves, bigger than the U.S., bigger than Saudi Arabia, in fact. But the amount of oil the country actually produces is tiny by comparison, about 900,000 barrels per day. That's barely a third of what it was 10 years ago and accounts for less than 1% of global consumption. Still, Venezuela sells about $4 billion of crude a year, mainly to China and the U.S. It's not just their biggest export, it's actually the backbone of their entire economy. Experts estimate petroleum accounts for roughly 25% of the country's gross domestic product. Chevron is the only American oil producer still active in Venezuela. Their responsible for about a fifth of the country's oil extraction. President Trump wants them, along with Exxon and ConocoPhillips, to tap the oil for America, but it won't be easy. Analysts project it could cost more than $100 billion and take at least a decade. Still, despite the warnings, Wall Street thinks it's a big win for big oil. Today, stock prices for the big three oil firms were up an average of 4%. But the American companies can't just jump in and start drilling. The infrastructure in Venezuela is in bad shape. It needs a major overhaul. And without long-term legal and political solutions in place, companies would be left gambling billions on the stability of a future Venezuelan government. And Patrick DeHaan joins us now. He's the head of petroleum analysis at Gas Buddy. Patrick, thanks so much for joining us. Walk us through what American oil companies need before they can really make a commitment in Venezuela.
Yeah, Lindsay, this is very early in the next chapter of Venezuela's history, and we still haven't found out exactly who will be leading Venezuela moving forward. Will it be somebody from Maduro's administration? Will it be another hardliner? Or will it be somebody from the opposition party who's more friendly with countries like the United States and other democracies? And until we have some certain clarity on who will lead the country moving forward, oil companies are probably very nervous about the increased risk from the uncertainty of not knowing who the next leader in Venezuela may be.
Why is the existing infrastructure in such bad shape, and what would it take it to repair?
Yeah, a lot of this is decades in the making under Hugo Chavez and his seizure of U.S. oil company assets back in 2007 rather. We've seen a chronic mismanagement, corruption, and simply a lack of investment. Now, part of that due to U.S. sanctions that have heavily caused some of the acceleration and deterioration of this infrastructure. Having said that, as you point out, it would take likely years to start rebuilding this. Keep in mind, back in 2024 and 2019, Venezuela was also contending with regular blackouts. And certainly there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be repaired before even another drop of oil is exported. There's going to have to be billions of dollars in investments and upgraders and pipelines and refineries and wells to all make this work.
How do you see all of this impacting oil and gas prices, both in the short and long term?
Well, as you mentioned, we did interestingly see some U.S. oil company stocks go up, although a lot of retail investors may be betting big on this. But a lot needs to happen for this to be unlocked. That is, Venezuela has an infinite potential, as you mentioned, some of the world's largest proven oil reserves. But it would likely take years once we do get clarity for who is going to lead Venezuela. Oil companies still burned by that 2007 seizure under Chavez of their assets are likely a little bit reluctant to build infrastructure and spend billions of dollars raising output, something that would take many years to really realize.
The U.S. is already the biggest oil producer in the world, but the type of oil in Venezuela that they produce, it's different. How so?
Yeah, this is extremely heavy, amongst the heaviest types of oil in existence worldwide, meaning that some of this oil is essentially almost jello-like in its consistency, very thick. It generally requires diluents like naphtha and condensate to essentially make this oil a higher viscosity so that this can be moved. So we're talking about very thick, high impurity content in this oil. Only really high complexity refineries can process this oil. Some of these refineries in the Gulf Coast have already been for decades refining Venezuela's oil. But keep in mind, only a certain few and very complex oil refineries can generally handle this Venezuelan type of oil.
Patrick DeHaan, very helpful analysis. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Coming up, Leonardo DiCaprio versus Timothée Chalamet at the Critics' Choice Awards. We have all the big winners from last night, plus behind the scenes at CES in Las Vegas. Why Legos may never be the same. The stern warning from the California Highway Patrol after 2 hikers are stranded on a steep cliff. How to get the first ever weight loss pill, and the humble Lego brick gets a high-tech update. These stories and more in tonight's rundown. Nighttime video shows a California Highway Patrol helicopter rescuing a pair of hikers who were stuck on a steep cliff off the northern California coast. The helicopter crew dropped off a paramedic, then circled around to bring the hikers on board. They were then taken to a waiting ambulance for further treatment. Later, the Highway Patrol reminded people on social media to allow plenty of time for safe return before darkness when hiking. The first and only oral weight loss pill for adults is now available to consumers by prescription. The oral GLP-1 Wegovy pill works by slowing down the movement of food through the stomach and curbing appetite. Drug maker Novo Nordisk received FDA approval in December and calls it a game-changing alternative to weekly injections. It's cheaper to produce and does not have to be refrigerated like the shots. Competitor Eli Lilly is also manufacturing their own version of a weight loss drug. It's expected to be approved by the FDA soon.
Burrow is under pressure. He's sacked.
Cleveland Browns defensive end Myles Garrett set a new record with his sack of Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow on Sunday. He marked a record 23 sacks for the season, breaking the NFL's single-season record. Garrett was swarmed by his teammates after the record-setting play and told reporters after the game, "I knew I had it in me." The Corporation for Public Broadcasting voted to dissolve itself after losing congressional funding last year. The private nonprofit was established by Congress in 1967 to steer federal funding for PBS, NPR, and other public radio and television stations across the country. Board members said that they preferred to shutter the organization rather than leave it vulnerable to political attacks from President Trump and other Republicans who have long accused public broadcasting organizations of bias. CES, formerly the Consumer Electronics Show, opens its doors in Las Vegas tomorrow, and we're getting a sneak peek at the latest tech launching later this year. Among the highlights is a high-tech update to the humble Lego brick. Lego unveiled a new smart play platform that adds interactive lights and sound to a standard 2x4 Lego brick.
Every model becomes an instrument, so you can imagine engines that rev as you move them, creatures that purr as you pet them, fires that are stoked as you blow onto them.
There are no screens required, just a custom-made chip inside, a number of sensors, and a tiny speaker. The Danish company says they'll be available to buy this spring. The 31st Critics' Choice Awards kicked off awards season on Sunday, offering a preview of the Academy Awards. The horror action film Sinners took home 4 trophies, including Best Original Screenplay and Best Young Actor. The action and thriller film One Battle After Another, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, won Best Picture. And Timothée Chalamet earned the Best Actor award for his portrayal of Marty in Marty Supreme. The Pit, The Studio, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and Abbott Elementary rounded out the winners in the television categories. Time now for our recap on everything that happened in the NFL this week. It is playoff time, but also a time for change because today was Black Monday in the NFL, a day we often see teams dismiss coaches and even front office staff now that their seasons are over. We spoke to ESPN's own Stephen A. Smith today and asked for his take on Black Monday and the upcoming playoffs. Black Monday, what do you think the NFL field, the playoff field is set? Your first take on what you're seeing?
Well, as it pertains to Black Monday, certain coaches had to go. I think, in a sense, not one of them was unjustified. All of them were justified. When you think about Arizona making its changes, Cleveland making its changes, obviously in season, Tennessee and New York making its changes, Las Vegas, the Raiders just making its changes. You see that kind of stuff happening, Atlanta making its changes. It's unfortunate, but you can see why those decisions were made. I'd like to see who's going to get an opportunity to do it. I remember a couple of years ago, there were like 7 openings, and like all 7 of the hires were white. I'd like to, there's a couple of there's a lot of qualified black coaches out there, but there's a couple in particular that definitely deserve a strong look. Especially a guy like Brian Flores, who used to coach in Miami, that was suing the NFL, and hopefully that'll go away soon, but he's definitely worthy of being a head coach. I'd like to see what happens with that. I'm excited to see what Tom Brady is going to do in terms of influencing Vegas's decision about who's going to be the next head coach. Then as it pertains to the actual playoffs themselves, it's a very, very exciting season. Kansas City is gone. Patrick Mahomes. Baltimore is gone. Lamar Jackson. But Josh Allen is still alive in Buffalo. Drake May is coming in New England. Bo Nix is coming, #1 seed, Denver. Trevor Lawrence has been out chomping at the bit for quite some time. Jacksonville looks formidable. C.J. Stroud has a big-time defense behind him in Houston. So it's a lot of stuff. It's up in the air. Aaron Rodgers, 41 years old, but playing lights out like he did last night. And then you've got, you just look at the Chargers and Justin Herbert. So it's a lot of parity. That's the AFC. NFC, you got the reigning Super Bowl champion, Philadelphia Eagles. They're number 3 seed. They're still something to contend with. Chicago has been on a come up. Ben Johnson has done an exceptional job. He's one of my top 2 candidates for Coach of the Year. Caleb Williams could really play. And they've got some talent on that squad. And then you look at the Los Angeles Rams, who should be a favorite. Seattle, nobody wants to go to Seattle to have to play. And they got the number 1 seed. Carolina's in the playoffs. Green Bay's in the playoffs. So you see all of this stuff, and you can't really decide who's going to win. There's nobody. When Kansas City was playing, you said, Patrick Mahomes, what you going to do to knock him off? There's nobody like that now in the playoffs. You're looking at everybody.
Not Jalen Hurts?
No, because Philadelphia has been too shaky offensively. Their defense is stout, but offensively, there have been too many questions on too many occasions. You find yourself looking at them and saying, when y'all going to get y'all act together?
Who's going to the Super Bowl?
If I have to guess, I think Seattle is going to be incredibly tough to beat, but I think the one team that could go to Seattle and beat them is the Los Angeles Rams, led by a phenomenal coach in Sean McVay. I mean, he's a boy wonder. He's a special coach. And Matthew Stafford is my league MVP. He's special. So I would say him and the Los Angeles Rams. Out of the NFC, AFC is really, really, really tough. Jacksonville has to be paid attention to. But here's where Denver is tough. Denver, the altitude. You got to be accustomed to that. And to not be accustomed to that, that could be, and they got the number 1 seed though. The road to the Super Bowl has to go through Denver. But if I had to pick anybody, even though I'd love to pick my Steelers, I can't. I'd love to pick Houston because their defense is elite, but I can't. Believe it or not, I'm gonna shock everybody, and I'm gonna say Jacksonville. I'm gonna say Jacksonville and LA. I'm probably wrong, but I'm going to say
that
Jacksonville.
happens?
Yeah, it happens. It happens. It's about 5% of the time. It happens. But I'm going to have to go with Jacksonville right now.
And that is our show for this hour. I'm Linsey Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Good night.